Youre, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm sitting here with my friend
Sze-En Watts.
and we hope you enjoy this episode. Just as I was saying before, this is the most fidgety I've ever been before an interview. And I don't know what... I've been doing this, over 60 episodes now, over 60 hours of talking to different people. But I think because this one, we've been trying to get, nearly every weekend, we're like, this weekend, and then something happens.
That's true.
Even the types of things that happen, though, when we're trying to get it, we won't divulge into what's actually happening, but it's like, it's like you're living so many different lives, and then we finally get you in here, and I'm like, okay, I've got to get this right. I think that's why I've put all this pressure on myself to, I need to nail this.
It's okay, I'm here.
You're here?
I'm not going anywhere.
And you're ready to go. But
I'm ready.
There are people around that you'll talk to, or you'll see different things come up, right? And you'll see, so I was at the staff club the other day, and then I was like, oh, that name looks familiar. Then I look back at your name. It's like some sort of award thing that you've been recognised for. And it's just, I guess, you talk to different people as well and what people have been a part of. And there's one name that kind of is in the middle of a lot of that sort of stuff. And it happens to be your name. And you're just involved with other people trying to get better. I think that's the best way to kind of describe what your sole purpose is, or what it feels like from an outsider's perspective looking in. How do you feel about that? Actually being part of a lot of people's lives?
Oh, I've often thought about this, in that I have this amazing role where I get to be a part of so many different people's lives, and I have impacted people's lives in ways that maybe sometimes I don't even really understand or I've even known about. And that some people might go through their entire lives not knowing whether or not they have impacted somebody's life really positively. And so I think that's a huge honor and a privilege to be able to be a thread in so many people's stories since I've been in this position.
Yeah, and it's because when you started here at the university, did you start in this role knowing that that's what you were going to do, or did you pick something up and then it kind of led to where you were at? So what's that journey been like?
Ooh, when I first started, I think I just remember staring at the computer screen with this platform that I'd never used before, and I thought, okay, all I have to do is create a little database of volunteer roles.
Right.
And I could do that. I can do that. But then that felt very lonely to me, and the work is very centered around volunteering.
Yep.
And volunteering is not meant to be a lonely experience.
For sure.
In my opinion. And so I really wanted to create a community around it and intentionally invite others to be a part of that community. And I think that's how I found my people and created a space for other people to find their people. And I think it's just kind of ballooned into this thing that nobody ever saw coming. When we decided that this institution would need a place that was going to be really focused around student volunteering. And I love that, I love that we have been making it up for almost 10 years, and it's been really directed by what students have really wanted, what students have really needed, what the community has needed, and rather than, us coming in with this kind of savior complex and saying, we've got this great idea and here's something we prepared earlier. So that's been, I think, one of the things that feels good about our work is that it feels authentic. It feels driven by, I suppose, not just good intention, but also that critical reflection of, are we the best people to be running this kind of stuff? Or who else could we actually lend support to who is already doing this work and are the best people to lead this work?
That's awesome. And those are hard reflections to have sometimes, because there are times where you feel like you want to be, I don't know, it's not that you feel like you're the one who should be responsible for this, or that you're the one who's going to put your name to it, but sometimes it's hard to to feel like, will this get done right? Because I don't know, there's just something that comes in you like, I care about this a lot, but then like sometimes caring the most is making sure that there are the right people doing it, even though you know in your heart that you would give it the best that you can. There probably are sometimes people who could do it slightly better, or were the people who were meant to be doing the role. And you talked about the savior complex, which like, that's something that we combat a lot, I guess, in a lot of the Indigenous research that we do. There are people who, use all the best words. They know exactly how to write an application. They know how to say the right things, and maybe they like truly feel like I can do this. But yeah, it just the resource that it takes away from a lot of other people who do great stuff anyway. That those are things that can't quite come out. And when you were talking about the community interests and the context. Over 10 years, like decades, because I've been here since 2013, so I'm going into that dwell. But like, there's been the generations of students that come through as well. So like, we're going through maybe 3 generations, and the shift in what is needed now is something that you would have noticed and then also responded to. So from beginning and trying to like even just conceptualize what this could look like to how it's playing out now, like what have been your main reflections over that time?
I think I've been really curious to see whether or not the institutions are recognizing just how quickly the changes are happening with the students who are coming in terms of their expectations of like the social literacy, the environmental literacy, the racial literacy of the people who are going to teach them and be around them and to lead them. And I think leadership is really only just starting to catch up with that reality.
Sure.
Though those expectations have been coming in from students, particularly in the past couple of years, since lockdown and Black Lives Matter really coming back up into people's faces in really, really public ways and on social media. And I think that's been really obvious to me in the role that I have, because it's so student facing and because I'm surrounded by students every day, and I see the stuff that they care about. And then it's interesting to see those things not reflected back in the environments that are supposed to be here to support them.
For sure.
And so students are, I guess, coming up with ways to do that for themselves. And I love that. But it's a sign of the times, like impatience and seeing a gap and needing to fill it. People don't need that same kind of permission that maybe they used to think they need. That's not everywhere. But I guess we're seeing more of it in terms of people recognizing their own agency, challenging those assumptions of, do I need permission and from whom, before I can start this thing for myself, for my community, because we need it.
Yeah, there's a lot of that stuff going on now. And it's just, I think, just the access that we have to different, like technology as well. But also, I think it is the realization within a lot of students coming through, even just people in general, just realizing like, if you take out the person in the middle, we can get this going like much faster, but also much more effective, because we don't have all the barriers in place that like, if we need to go through, get these sorts of permissions, you need to do this to get this. But then it's got some sort of oversight by that we can't do all the things that we want to do because then it doesn't fulfill this criteria, or that goes against this policy. Whereas like if you start an underground thing, it's like, all right, there are no rules in Fight Club. Just don't talk about it. Yeah,
exactly. It is very much a little bit like that. And then sometimes you just have to deal with the reality of, sometimes when things are really successful, it's kind of hard to hide them, because then people also want to be associated with the success of that.
Yes.
And while that has its pros, it doesn't always feel completely genuine. And it's like, oh, that's a good bandwagon to, offset some of the other not so great things that are being sold in the media. So that's been interesting to reflect on. And maybe that's not the reality, but sometimes it does feel like that.
Yeah, and that's something that I think you begin to notice when you do go out on a limb, because there's an idea that's probably good. It doesn't quite get the backing at the beginning because people think it might be a good idea, and I'm just thinking about the stuff that you do and how long you've been in the game and just what has kind of come out of that. And that when you said it before, that people would congratulate and say that they were there from the beginning, they always believed in it, but never gave any resource until it started becoming successful. Like, you needed to kind of prove it, but then it gets to a point where it grows beyond like anything that you could have imagined, but it only grew beyond what it could have been is because it had that organic flow. I don't know if you get like that feeling, but then, sorry, there's two ideas coming out of here, but then there's like cultural diversity that they need for portfolios. That once they see, oh my gosh, this is our way in. This is where we can get this and celebrate it. Because this has been something that we've been kind of dealing with recently. Is that once we notice that it's being used and actually like, oh wait, hold on, this is so that we can be put on posters. Then we like start withdrawing our support for it, and then the resource goes immediately. For you, just like being able to create these things, how do you hold a position, and this is probably something you're still doing, but how do you hold like firm grounds to make sure that they do keep their authentic or their organic nature about the things that you are creating or that you as a collective are creating?
Oh, how do we stay true to our kind of grassroots, groundswell kind of approach? I think it's that commitment to the process.
Sure.
Rather than focusing 100% on achieving the outcomes, because you can have the outcome, but if the process is shitty and people feel shitty along the way, then I don't think you've really done anybody any favors. And so I think commitment to that process, which is not perfect. It's about taking time. It'll be messier. You'll swing more towards the chaos end of the organized chaos end spectrum. And I think just creating space for that process is how we continue to keep doing what we do and the way that we do it. And so that relies on me having that patience and me having to deal with my own expectations of maybe what the outcome was going to look like. And in the beginning, I used to be maybe a little bit more caught up in that final 5%, and now I'm like, it's not worth it. It's totally fine from if we hit 85% of what we thought we were going to achieve and everyone feels good, everyone feels well, and it's fine to stop there. Nothing is going to fall down if we don't do that final 15%.
For sure.
And we've found that, the things that we produce, the events that we host, that students come to, and that it's students who've really shaped what that experience is, they're not perfect. I remember running an event where, as the organizer, you're acutely aware of every time someone gets up to go to the toilet, and it's wooden floorboards, it's creaky as shit. And then the doors to go out are they're like full on fire doors. So like giant slam every time they go to the toilet and when they come back from the toilet. And as an organizer, you're like, how did we not see this? But then nobody is going to remember that.
Exactly, yeah.
And just reminding myself to take a step back and go, that's not what people really give a shit about. And so you can recognize those things and let them go. And if I were to like hold on to those things with dear life and then put it to the team and say, why did we not think of this, and really focus on the wrong things, then I'm not doing my best to help the students who we work with, lean into their potential and see their agency and see the things that they're really good at. And I think just balancing a lot of that narrative that, students, they're not old enough to have this level of responsibility. They, all that kind of stuff around permission and agency. Yeah, my job is to really foreground that positive stuff and get them to reimagine and reframe some of the space where weaknesses, but it's actually room for other people to come alongside you and to complement the things that you're good at with the stuff that they're good at.
For sure.
And
and it's being able to acknowledge that you have that weakness first, but then also that you are part of teams for a reason. There's reasons why we hire different people who have different skill sets. It's not so that you can grow them and they can do everything, but it's just like they're good at this and they love doing that. I hate doing that, so I'm going to let them do it because that's their strength and they'll come through. It may not look like what I wanted initially, but they're the ones who know the job. That's their thing. And when you were talking about the like noticing all the small things, it's always been like a barrier for a lot of our stuff going forward, because we always nitpick the very small things, and then the big themes. Like, for example, when people like come on here and maybe we pause for, it could be 3 seconds. In my mind, I was like, that's a 10-minute blank. I'm freaking out. Like, what do we need to say? I'm freaked. But like, I forgot the entire hour of just absolute beauty, like gems that were coming out just from them having a bit of time to think and then putting it out there. I'm like, how did I forget all of that just because of these small things that I got so hung up on? And it's because I'm trying to produce perfection. It's the outcomes that you're talking about rather than like just letting it flow, letting it come out. So that's
trust the process.
Absolutely. Yeah. As long as you've got something in place going forward. But I think because we're friends, I just went into like, so you do all this, but I haven't actually said what you do. Like maybe, so where did you start? And what are you actually in now? Because you've talked about hosting events. Everyone's like, she a caterer? What's actually going on here?
So I lead a space that is very centered around social impact and creating space for students to really take a lead in that. In whatever way, shape or form that takes. And so sometimes it's hosting gatherings. And so we like to talk about hosting gatherings with guests rather than having, events with attendees. And just because it frames the way that we might look at the way that we interact with the people who we invite, and not focusing on things like projectors and napkin colors and rather, how do we make sure that, that awkward time when you walk into a room and suddenly realize there's nobody else there. Like, how do we make sure that moment is like minimized as much as possible?
That sounds like something I want to be a part of. I talk on this about like me freaking out. I don't go to events because of the small things like that. Like, how do you, what conversations do you have where that becomes like something? I'm sorry, this is the smallest thing in that entire thing you just said, but how do you get to a position where, or like, what are the conversations that happen where you can break down an event like that to make sure that everyone's as comfortable as possible?
I guess we just walk through our own experiences.
That's awesome.
That time when you have to get on a bus, and then you're like, oh my god, I'm here by myself. Who do I sit with? Do I sit by myself, or do I like make friends and sit with somebody? But then I have to like awkwardly say hi. But what if they're on their phone? Do I disrupt them, or do I just sit down and go on my phone? But I'm here to make friends,
right?
And so we change that up by adding an extra half an hour to before we get on the bus so that students who rock up can have a cup of tea and just like mingle and get to know each other. And our leads are there with their host hat on. And, when you have a dinner party and you invite your friends over, you want them to meet each other. And so you kind of do the little intros and be like, hey, so-and-so, meet so-and-so, they're from here. And, you might be really interested in this stuff that they're doing. And intentionally embedding those in, and rather than like leaving it up to chance that people might feel comfortable enough to do it themselves.
For sure.
So I think it's recognizing that we've all been through those really awkward moments, because it is those tiny little moments that add up to how somebody might feel at the end of an event, whether or not they've felt safe or whether they've felt welcome. Or if they felt connected. And, that's been a learning journey for us. For so many years, we never did the tea and coffee and stuff before.
Right.
But then, we still revisit that question. And this particular year, one of the students suggested that, and it was so simple. And now we try to do it wherever we can to minimize that awkwardness, because I think, connection and community is such a core part of what we do around social impact. And how do we embody those things that we really give a shit about?
Sure.
and really try to do those for students, knowing that, when we send students out to different community groups, that we hope that our students are hosted in that way rather than showing up as free labor. So I guess we try to set our own bar to where we hope it is elsewhere.
That's
No
awesome.
one loves that real awkward that awkward moment of not belonging or feeling really insecure or not confident. Because even the most confident people will, go to the bathroom and stay there for half an hour. Because you don't want to be the first one there of your friends.
No, that's awesome. And I think just from what it sounds like it's easy to look at it and just be like, well, we'll see how it plays out. But I think a lot of it is very intentional. The reflection is like there's a lot of you have the intention for what's going to happen, and then you're very intentional around how you reflect on the different things. But something that I've noticed the way that you're speaking as well is you're very intentional on the language you're using. So the actual where you work and just using the words, social impact is like, right, there's so many different things that it could be called. Is that was that a personal thing, or was that like how it was already framed, or was this like a process to actually get it to be something like that? And then we'll get into what social impact is for you.
When I started, all the language was around volunteering.
Okay.
And it's one of those words that I instinctively knew, kind of gets in its own way.
Right.
Because it is a very Western middle class concept where, people who might have the luxury of free time can then go and spend a couple of hours for a charity.
For sure.
And it didn't really include all the other ways that people give back to their communities, whether it's through, unpaid service or mahi aroha, and being really inclusive of, like Māori and Pacific communities. You wouldn't count all the hours that you do with kapahaka or, welcoming guests to a marae as volunteer hours that you would then, enter into a form and spit out an award, a certificate. And so in 2019, we made a pitch to rebrand as rather than like the Uni Volunteer Centre to be the Social Impact Studio.
Cool.
And maybe because of the person I am,
right.
I really didn't want to use those really typical names like centre and office and department. They just didn't feel right. And originally we did ask for something that was like a centre for social impact, and then leadership said, you're not a research centre, so you can't start with centre. And so we just went back to the drawing board, and then studio popped up as an option, and that felt right because creativity has always been super core to what we do, and a studio is always a place for collaboration and sometimes unexpected collaboration, and we really like that. And so now we are the Social Impact Studio. And I remember I felt good about it, but then I also messaged a few people who I they're my really good reference points in this kind of mahi, and their feedback was really positive. And as previous and current students of the uni, they thought it would be something new and get people to think twice about volunteering as a concept, to be more inclusive and broader, so that we can be more reflective of what community looks and feels like, rather than what is traditionally known as volunteering.
Sure.
Because otherwise we would just be perpetuating systems and cycles that lead to the inequalities that result in those volunteer opportunities. So I think we sit in this funny kind of tension place where we're still doing some of that because it's just so embedded, and but it's like, how do you play the game to change the game? And so while we have students who, some of them will undoubtedly still go out and volunteer without having done critical reflection on why this inequality exists, who's doing the helping, who's getting helped. even language around giving back, and like who are the needy ones is all part of the problem. And so we're trying to balance that, you know, sending students out to do volunteering with more of that mental mahi, that kind of critical reflection and understanding of who they are.
Yeah.
Having those, you know, first conversations about privilege and where privilege exists in this relationship when you do want to contribute to positive social change, but are you actually?
Sure.
And we can see how confronting that is for a lot of students who've never had to think about privilege before, or how that might colour an interaction that they think is really good and nice and feels good for them, but in a lot of ways does the opposite.
Sure. Yeah, that stuff, so like, I think there's a couple of phases that people go through, and you see it when people start getting a little bit of like a taste of what's actually happening, like what the real world, how it actually functions, and you start to learn a couple different theories or lenses or social lenses on how to view the world. And I think what I admire about how you've come through is that there's the first part where people start to notice it and recognize it, and you've probably seen it in a bunch of people that you've either mentored through the process or just have reflected on the process. But it gets to a point sometimes when you talk to different people where that because of all of that stuff and the actual work that you have to put in to understand what's going on, how you're perpetuating or how you're continuing to uphold different systems, where you feel like, wait, is the best thing for me to just not do anything? Like, how did you... There's probably conversations that you have with yourself or with your reference group where you're like, should I just not do anything? Like, am I actually better off just not being here? Because that voice pops in a lot, and that's whether you don't think you have the capability or the capacity to do it, or you just genuinely think, like, I think I'm making it worse here. Like, how many times has that come through? Because when you're trying to, I know as much as people love to, you know, go out there, it's the people who are very empathetic and do this because this is just part of their heart, where they will have the most critical reflections and kind of circle back in on themselves and being like, oh no, am I my own worst enemy right now? And how do you get out of that?
I think we haven't ever thought to not do it. Because if we don't do it, who else is doing that?
Fantastic, yeah. And
particularly with, you know, conversations around race and privilege, they are awkward conversations. And, you know, I am, for those listening, you know, I'm a Chinese woman. And I look very Asian. I don't sound particularly Asian in the stereotypical sense, because I was brought up in Australia, and but English is my main language. But I've become more reflective of how my identity as a Chinese person has made me reflect on, you know, my own experiences of race and what privilege I have, and how I can use this position that I have combined with my own ethnic heritage to create a space for students to engage in this really awkward conversation. But willingly and intentionally stepping into that space, knowing, you know, that is a burden that I've chosen to take on. But I do it because I know that it's worth it, you know, to create a space that feels safe for students to just fess up and say, shit, you know, that time I went and did volunteer tourism, that was I just didn't know. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And rather than keeping it hidden as, someone's dirty little secret that they're worried that, when they're a professional, somebody might, dig that out and use it against them.
Yeah.
So it's about, teaching students about how to be more accountable for their own history and how do you deal with that? How do you process it and keep moving so you don't sit in this shame cycle that then becomes all about you and not what you're wanting to see change in and be part of. But yeah, sometimes I think, my journey into, unpacking privilege and race and identity has probably only, come to a fore in the past couple of years.
Sure.
And I think, I wonder if I had been exposed to this conversation, as a teenager, what that would have meant for my choices.
Yeah.
And who knows? But I am grateful to be in a position where we can support students to start thinking about these conversations.
Oh, yeah.
So that, before they're fully fledged professionals, as part of a institution, I think it's part of our due diligence to make sure that every student has engaged with this kind of conversation before they leave, because so many of them are going to be in service of communities. Yeah. They're going to be in front of people who they have zero understanding of, and if they haven't been challenged to develop that empathy and critical understanding of, helping, then we are part of that problem, and we are not doing our due diligence at the moment, and I'm impatient. I've never been a patient person, and I also not a fan of I guess waiting until this perfect program has come out and waiting 5 to 10 years for that when we could be doing that work now because that information exists out there.
For sure.
And so we just get on with it.
Yeah.
And, we don't make any pretenses about being experts in this field, but rather just saying, as individual humans, we don't want to be a part of the problem. We want to be a part of the solution. And if we're all really committed to that, then you will give up 2 hours on your Wednesday night and sit in our office and reflect on the chapter about you and anti-blackness towards black children. And if that's what it takes, then that's what it takes. And that's a choice that I've made personally. And I haven't regretted it so far.
No, that's awesome. I really do like that sort of thing as well, where like you see you're always working. It's like it's not that you're being quiet in different times. It's just that you may look dormant, but there's actually a lot of strategizing going on, because once the right, like not the right time, but like there's going to be a pocket of time where everything kind of aligns, but you see it coming, like there's rhythms where like it's time to go now, like okay, we missed that, but if we deploy like at other times it might not be as effective. So that's part of that impact, is like how do we maximize the amount that we can get out of this opportunity here. Sometimes you miss it and then you go like, all right, back to the drawing board, but the fact that you're still like thinking, and it's always like we're good to go whenever we need to, and then once the right time comes we'll go in there. And like, because we teach Pacific Health, and I'm very intentional about how I do it. I'm just like, I'm going to make you a little bit uncomfortable. And then after like an hour, you just have people who are just like, what the heck? We get this in our last year and we're going to go out and we get 1 hour of this. And I'm just like, I give them almost too much so that they're like just for a little bit. And then I remind them at the end, I'm just like, you're not going to know it all, but the best you can do is like actually just be aware of it. And they're like, you only get this at the end. And now you've got to go out into the world. But at least, hopefully, there's just like one person or two people or their interactions now where it's like, I've got that little bit of curiosity. I can go and learn a little bit more now. And like, that's kind of the least we can do in that time. I'm not going to teach you how to be the best at this. And then one thing I envy kind of about not being quote unquote experts, like those, is that you don't have the institutional rigor that is around what we're allowed to do. Because you're just like, that seems interesting. You go look into it and it'd be like, how about this? And then they're like, wow, that's so cool, you know? I do like how that's kind of and I think it keeps it authentic. So back to the first question, I was like, how do you keep it authentic? How do you keep it organic? It's just because you're like, that would be interesting. Or like, these people want this. Should we do something like that? And you just do it. It's just a conversation. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's just keeping it low res.
Yeah.
And be guided by the people, I guess. There was a thought that I had. It was a quote that someone said to me once, or that I heard from some speaker, and it's, progress happens at the rate of trust.
Ooh. Ooh. All right.
And, you know, some of the work that we do in the studio might be around mental health and well-being. That's a place where we've seen where progress happens at the rate of trust, and creating spaces where people feel like they trust you to hold them in that space safely.
Yeah.
And how that might translate to, you know, things that people are doing or listeners are doing, or other places, you know, around the university that they want to see change. And they're trying different things, but if you don't have the trust of the people, you might not get very far.
For sure.
Or people might just think, it's just for show. It might not feel authentic to the people who you need to be a part of it to make it a success. And I think we don't spend enough time on that trust building and communicating what's happening to build that trust.
For sure.
You know?
That's really, I think that's so cool. Like, there's so many emails that come through of people who have a great opportunity for me, but I'm like, who are you? And then that's why I never get back to them, because like, we haven't got that, but now you're expecting something from me. Like, even that sort of thing as well. But also, like, a lot of us are giving ourselves, which I think we don't maybe think too much on. You know, it's like, we've got a good opportunity for you, and then we think like capitalistic. We're like, this is great, I can get a career out of this. But what we don't realize is that everything we come with, everything that's part of who we are, is like, that's capital that no one could ever learn or do, because that's just how you grew up. That's just what you know. That's your life. That's everything that makes you you. That's part of your even your DNA, if you want to get scientific. But that's stuff that they'll make it seem like we're doing you a favor. But actually, we're doing them a huge favor. We're doing everyone a huge favor by just being part of things, because what we don't realize is that when we give, we're giving a perspective that they could never have had at any point. And this is every single person who's wondering around. Their perspective of the world, their worldview in general, is so unique because of everything that they've had to go through. Like, they might go through similar things to other people, but the unique sequencing of how everything's played out in their life is what makes them them. Yeah, because I always come back to, like, we could have all been the same person, but we weren't, because of how our environment played out and how that changed the way we saw the world, which then leads us on our different paths. So we started the same, and then just oh god, I think if everyone was the same as me, we would be a mess. There'd be no doors on any building. We'd just kick them all down. No, but it's awesome. And then so part of that as well is like the other stuff that you're part of, and I don't know like where that sits, because you've also kind of come outside of your work, but like most of your work is centered on, you know, trying to, you know, make people's lives better, or make people realize that they can be the catalyst for change in their lives, as well as other people that they care about as well. So like, because we're working on some stuff right now for the tāne out there, but you know, that's you realizing that you need other people as well. But that falls under, does that fall under Silverline stuff? No. That's other stuff? Yeah. So where does this come in? This baby of a thing that's just like pretty cool. So It's Not Awkward Bro and male mental health stuff. Again, came from the students. Yeah. And them being very honest about, hey, I think we need something that's more
tailored to the male experience. And if we want to engage with guys more successfully, then we got to change the way that we do things. Change the language, change blah, blah, blah. But again, also that trust element. And really, you know, I could sit in the studio and have all these great ideas, but I do not identify as a male. And so I'm not the right person to drive these initiatives. And so it's having the patience and waiting for people to return to uni. It's being aware of who's around, like you, to make those connections between people who I think, you know, with your powers combined, you know, you can do some good stuff. Like that's my role. Kind of the matchmaker, but you know, I'm not there in the relationship full on you, but I might like pay for your dinners.
Right.
So I think that is a space where I know that it's not my space to stand up in. I'll be in the audience, but I don't need to be on stage.
Right.
And you know, like I'm wicking the lights and sussing the food and stuff. But it's not always like that, you know, from what we see around the place.
Sure.
And everyone will make their choices, but this is the choice that has felt the most authentic to us in terms of, you know, values that we want to uphold. And, you know, respecting who is best placed to lead those conversations.
Sure.
Even if it means that I don't get to go to things. And that's fine.
Yeah.
You know, you can't, if I muscled my way into events that are hosted by Snorkel Bro events where they've decided, you know, the audience is for the fellas, then I'm being a hypocrite.
Right.
And, you know, contradicting my own values by prioritizing my need to be there to oversee or to make sure or to be seen. And, you know, as someone in a leadership position, knowing when to step back and letting everybody else, you know, have their solo. But, you know, just carry on in the background. But I don't need to be there.
No, that's really cool because like this started because I wanted it's like a male mental health group. Like we just would talk. This was my conversation to everyone, and we'd talk. But then what I started noticing was that like our audience went from like predominantly male to just like 80% female, and I was like, this is not. And then but like some of the messages I got was so that they could understand their partners, and I was like, that's so interesting. I never would have thought that that's the types of reasons you would try to listen to this, is so that when they're male, because a lot of them would, I've had a few times which really frustrated me was women who would say men just need to speak more, and I'm like, we do speak, we just don't want to speak to you. But like, how do we say that in a way where it's like, I don't trust you, but it's just like there are certain things, there's a space that only certain things can kind of come up. It's like a sacredness around the types of things we think we're allowed to talk about, or that where we feel comfortable speaking about those things. So there are spaces, and for you to be aware of that sort of thing is like, I think it's more on like a spiritual level. And you can say spiritual, then people think you're talking like, oh, you know, we're gonna burn some sage and stuff. But there is a feeling that you get where, you know, that queasy feeling of I'm not meant to be here. That's where I think a lot of people fall down, because I have been, I wouldn't say hater, but I'll put H8A, hater, that sort of hater, about some of the things that are done out there, because I do feel they're more performative than they are for people to actually get better. It's to show that we're doing an event on this is us, we're contributing to this, and then we'll only focus on outputs. But then, like I said, like you said earlier, it's like the whole process of getting you to that point is totally missed, which means that there are a lot of people who are falling through the crack here. So yeah, that's a good start. It's a great start. And so Silverline's the overall, like the kind of, what would you call that? Like how do you brand it? How do you talk about it?
I guess we really talk about Silverline as a community.
Yeah.
But also a movement
Yeah.
of thinking differently about mental health and well-being, and how you talk about it, how we challenge not just students, but staff and institutions to think differently about mental health and well-being, and how students want to engage with it, and how, from another angle, people could say it's very kind of public health messaging. It's preventative, and it is. It is bottom of the triangle stuff that can be harder to see the results.
Oh, yeah.
But you just got to trust that it's happening.
Yep.
It's difficult to measure. The time horizons are very different, and that raises challenges for funding. Or how do you show that you are making changes in this kind of space? And it takes a different mindset when you're allocating resources. Because you also have to come up against or just recognize that there are those really immediate urgent needs. But if we're wanting to see changes there, then we have to reallocate our resources differently, because nothing changes if nothing changes. And if we continue on the way that we're going, I just don't see how things are going to change. And we're going to lose people while we figure that out. And that's heartbreaking.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, with that, when you were talking about measuring, so that's just something that's almost like my goal in research, is to be able to somehow measure like spiritual wavelengths of how people feel about it. I know I keep saying spiritual and then get but one thing I'm very interested in is like the impact of research and the impact of people doing stuff, because a lot of people will do stuff, and a lot of the preventative stuff, you like touched on so many cool things. They're like, yes, it's hard to measure it, because like they may have greater qualitative aspects that's the stuff that we don't even measure, because when you show up into health clinics and all that sort of stuff, like the time to event is what we measure, but like that's only if you go seek the help. But sometimes like those intermediate steps are missed, and then it's like very, very, very drastic on the other side. But all the people who are just like now being able to wake up a little bit easier, or not have to feel like they're alone and all that sort of stuff, like if you can measure that sense of feeling, then I'm like, okay, this is impact. This is like what makes, we look at the daily average living years, or so like the amount of living years that people will have, and then we measure how long they're going to live from that point. But like, what about how great it is while they're living those extra years? Like, how can we measure that stuff without having to, for it to be burdensome? Because then that's like, we don't want to allocate funding to this, because then you have to do all this stuff. But it's like, no, we've got a tool now. So that's when you were talking.
I look forward to that. When you figured out
I have a beard by then, but but yeah, that's my life's work. I'm really, really interested in that stuff. But I think the philosophy of what you're doing is, I don't know, do you ever, give yourself props for it?
I've learned to be confident in recognizing the things that I'm good at.
Cool.
And I think that helps the students to be okay with recognizing that for themselves as well, because tall poppy syndrome is real.
Sure.
And I love the things that I'm good at. And you should love the things that you're good at, and be honest with yourself about the things that you're not great at.
Sure.
And that's okay. And if it's an opportunity for somebody to come alongside you and with your powers combined do something better, then let's do that, rather than to be ashamed that I can't be perfect and do all the things. So yeah, like I I don't necessarily wake up and, have these daily affirmations where I say, I'm awesome, I'm amazing, I'm phenomenal. But I always feel good about myself.
Right.
I might not feel, sometimes I might do things that'll be those like instances that I think, oh, that probably wasn't ideal, but it's not, I'm shit.
Yeah.
And I guess I try as best as I can to reflect that to the people who I work with and the students who I work with. Like, I don't think I ever say anything shitty about myself.
Right.
Like, I don't say I'm a failure.
Right.
I suck as a manager. I don't talk smack about my own identity.
Right.
I can recognize when maybe I haven't done something perfectly or if I've hurt somebody.
Yep.
But that doesn't then mean that I am awful and that I am, that's me.
Yeah.
And I think just making that distinction. I don't know if you can tell, but, Brené Brown stuff coming through here.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's that's simple for me.
Yeah.
I think just making that distinction between knowing who I am and the things that I'm awesome at,
Yep.
which allow me to do the things that I want to do, that I want to show up and
Yep.
be able to do every day. So some of it's mindset.
Sure.
But yeah, I think it's really important that we don't talk smack about ourselves because I feel, again, something I read somewhere once that, when you say something aloud, you kind of speak it into existence.
Yep.
And even if you think that, if you think it, then it might actually come out. And if you come out and you're and you're hearing yourself say these things, it just seems like this awful cycle of negativity that doesn't get you to where you want to be.
Yeah, but then also being someone who's like forward facing and seeing other people as well. If they they pick up, because you become a role model. Not that you ever plan to be, but there are people who see what you do or see like that's something that I'd be interested in, or that's a person who I really respect. And if they see you being like that, like it's hard to think that other people would carry those characteristics. But like as soon as they see, oh wait, they do it, okay, so it must be okay. Or if they're like that, is that really what I want to be like? Like, even though everything about you is what they like, but it's just like they may start to carry those things into their lives as well, or they might just think it's okay to be able to do that sort of thing because you're a person who they respect. And it's weird what people pick up because we never see it because we're just like, oh well. But then you like hear stories of later. They're like, hey, you remember when you did it? I do that now. And
I know. It's like I said that to you.
Yeah. That's so cool. But so when I was talking about that and being able to, you're facing a lot of people, and that how. Because something that I, noticed as soon as I started this podcast, as soon as I realized I was me and I'm just someone who loves to give, where do the boundaries come when you have to set them, and how are they set? And when, like, do you have a checklist? Do you check with yourself? Do you have someone you're accountable to who you like say, hey, look, I'm going to say no to all this stuff, or because it's so easy to give when you're from that. Yeah.
Oh, and I was just talking about this yesterday, actually. Our work it will take what you give. And if you don't know when to stop giving, you can't rely on the work to say stop giving. I feel like you need to take a break. And it's really hard. It's kind of like that typical not-for-profit narrative, where it just, runs on people's enthusiasm and passion. And while there is a lot of that, the studio does take, and our team gives. But while we say to our student volunteers, you need to tell us when you can't give, I think that's something that we as a team have had to the staff team need to also be better
For sure, right.
at doing for ourselves. But, you mentioned people who I'm accountable to. Like, I've got a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old.
Oh, yeah.
And a husband.
Yep.
And a dog.
Yep.
And so I'm accountable to them as a wife, as a mother. And before I was a mother, at least, I could blur the lines a little bit more.
Sure.
If my partner was away on field work, like, I'll just go into work and do those things that I didn't get to do during the week. But kids definitely, say, you got to stop thinking about work, Mum, because I want you to play Lego with me.
Yeah.
And so I'm very grateful to them for helping me to learn how to set those boundaries and not giving me a choice about it, a lot of the times. And that's been key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like, I think this sort of talk comes in, especially around Matariki, when we're looking at the new year and being able to set kind of for our own work, but also who we are as people for everything else that goes on in our lives. And I just remember, like, a reflection was one of the lines that just hit, and I was just like, my gosh, that ain't that deep. We're at work. Like, they were just like, if I die because of this, my family will be sad. And I was like, that's all you need to say. Oh my gosh, like, how we got to this point where we're working ourselves into the ground, and the people that we want to spend the most time with will then lose us because of that. And I'm like, that's not as important. And then that just puts everything into perspective. And I was like, wow, okay. All right. So, like, hearing you speak about that, I was like, that's kind of, like, who do we need to show up as us for? And then, like, you immediately think of your family or the people who, you actually enjoy having really good times with. Yeah, no, that's awesome.
And it's an extra challenge because I love the people who I get to work with, and so I'm accountable to my family, but I'm also accountable to the students who are part of our studio whānau, and so I think that's where it's quite challenging. Sometimes. But, we're learning, always learning.
Yep.
And, different times of the year will require different things to for me to stay on top of stuff.
Yeah. Something we're experimenting with is using seasons. Looking at like the different energies that the moons give at different times, and actually trying to, like, follow that, because now that we pretty much have everything given to us, like, we have light whenever we need it, we have warmth whenever we need it, we can just work like the same, we can just keep the same productivity along the way, but that's, like, so against our innate nature. So what we're trying to do is, like, we're playing with seasons, and if it works, which I think it will, because there's a lot of rest time in there, we can actually be a lot more productive with. That's the theory behind it all. But then again, I say this now, and I have my ancestors being like, "We done told you since we didn't tell you to put those lights in." Yeah. So that's I think that's something to experiment with as well, and be able to look at that stuff. Man, damn it, this is we just, like, I kind of just was touching on all these little things, but the one thing that I ask at the end, and then this usually goes into, like, a conversation on its own, is what is something you do every day or close to every day that makes you feel like you've optimized the day?
Oh, I've optimized the day.
Or even maybe, like, you put your head on your pillow and you're like, that was good.
I think if I've read a book to my kids and I haven't rushed it.
Ooh.
And they've gone to bed happy and I haven't had to go in and say, go to sleep.
Yeah, right.
Because that means then I'm not in a rush. And I'm remembering to make time for the things that really matter.
Yeah. That's nice, yeah. And because I was thinking about, something along those lines where, like, when you're rushing things, it's really easy to see it as a task or a chore, as opposed to, this is leisure. This is what I love. And then, because when you do get into that mindset, it's really easy to start resenting things and then feeling like they are the issue. But it's like, no. Well, I've got this twisted right now.
Yep.
There's another issue that is making me get to this point.
Yep.
Yeah, of having to rush.
Completely.
That is so nice. So is it like when you do it as like you all get together and there's like a chosen book, or you choose it? Did they bring one to you?
Yeah, they'll usually have a book or two.
Yeah.
And then usually they'll have a fight about who gets to have which book read first. But yeah, if the bedtime routine is calm and happy, then I'm winning.
Yeah. Yeah. And it sets you up because like at the end of the day and at the start of the day, they're really good ways for setting you up for. So like if you have a really nice, peaceful evening time, hopefully like the next day you're actually well rested, and it's not because you got a lot of sleep, but it's just because you were peaceful going into it, rather than like frantic and then passing out and then having to like pick up on that adrenaline buzz again and go forward from there. Nice. And for you, just with the next year coming through, you've got a lot on. You don't have to talk specifically about the work, but for you in terms of your values and just things that you want to be implementing or be part of, what do you have that's exciting you, that's giving you energy? And it doesn't have to be a specific thing, but like the types of things that are happening.
I think I'm excited about some of the work that we're doing, that I guess we do a lot of stuff on the dance floor, if you will.
Yep.
And so it's very, for want of a better word, like operational.
Yeah.
And I think some of our work that has become a little bit more strategic, that will down the track potentially impact more students, because it will change the culture of the place, is exciting to me. But I think that's probably the thing. And I know my face is the way it is because I know the process won't be easy.
Yep.
The road won't be easy, but we're in a position to be able to influence change at some of those kind of balcony level spaces that,
awesome.
They better be ready.
Yeah.
Because we're coming.
Yeah, that's so cool. It's really, really cool. And I think that's a really good place to leave it. I honestly feel like we need to have like a monthly podcast or like something.
We could.
I honestly think we should, because like the amount of times we've caught up and there's just so many things that we go through, like all these ideas, and there's not many people that I like in this, in my immediate environment. Actually, there's not many people, in my immediate environment that I can just sit down, throw ideas out, and then it just ends up like somewhere else that we weren't even planning. So no, it's a privilege to know. It's a privilege to be be able to hear thoughts from the beginning as well, the inception of thoughts, but also to see the journey of different things as you explain it. And I'm just always in awe every time I speak with you, and I'm so glad we finally got to do this. But yeah, I think maybe a bit more regularly, but we're going to be working closely. So a lot of that stuff, when it does come out, I think it's good timing that we have this, because there are a few things that we're thinking through and being able to work through, being able to put that stuff out as well. Yeah, so I have huge respect for you, huge admiration of the stuff that you're doing, and I'm so stoked that you're out there doing what you're doing. So, no, thank you for your time.
My pleasure.